Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeremy Kitchen. I'm the Executive Director at Texans for Fiscal Responsibility. We are joined this morning by our fearless leader, Tim Hardin, President and CEO. Good morning, Tim.
Good morning, Jeremy.
A lot is happening this week. Of course, we are entering the last full week of the legislative session. We'll get to the deadlines here in a second, but of course, the end of the 88th legislative session is Memorial Day, Monday, May 29th. And so with the last week comes a lot of kind of impending deadlines that sort of build up, if you will, to the crescendo or the end of the legislative session. Let's talk about those real quick. I will briefly mention them, and then we'll kind of talk about some of the importance of it before we get into some of the bills that are still moving through the process. So Tuesday is kind of the first big one this week. It's the last day for the Texas House of Representatives to consider second reading Senate bills and Senate joint resolutions. Of course, we've already seen the calendar the House calendar be published through Tuesday. So we at least know the universe of bills that have still yet to be considered. It'll be interesting to see how far they get through these calendars. Wednesday is the last day for the House to consider local and consent calendar bills. And then it's also the last day for the Senate to consider all bills and joint resolutions on their version of the calendar. Thursday through Sunday kind of marks the different deadlines, if you will, for conference committee reports and determining whether or not they're good with what came out of that or concurring with amendments from the other chamber. And then, of course, as we said, we've got Monday being the end, if you will, sine die, the end of the legislative session. So, Tim, before we get into some of the specifics of the bills, wanted to get your thoughts on kind of where we're at in the session.
Yeah, we're in the home stretch for sure. All the deadlines are coming. Like you said, we're really just going to find out how far they're going to get down the calendar, right? Like at this point, they have a couple days stacked up. I believe the House was supposed to meet on Saturday. It looks like they punted to Monday. And so I think by tomorrow, we should have at least 2 days stacked up. And so I would probably say, the bills that are on the second half of that supplemental calendar, it's pretty likely they're probably going to die unless, for some reason they just get after it. But usually this is where you see, especially in the House, Democrats chubbing. They have their eyes on bills they don't want to pass. And so they're going to be wasting time and asking questions, things like that, because they know that, to kill a bill, they just have to make it past Tuesday. I think, and I know we're about to talk about it here in a minute, but there's still some really important pieces of legislation that have not made it all the way through. SB 3, one of them, which I know we're going to talk about that here in a minute. And so that my eyes are really on all of those, on the budget, on property tax reform, on school choice, even some of the kind of the weaker watered down border security measures, right? And so I just kind of have my eyes open. I'm watching what's going to go down in the next few days because essentially, once we get to Wednesday, it's pretty much that's all she wrote.
Well, let's go ahead and get into that. I mean, you mentioned it. It's arguably the most important bill of the legislative session, every legislative session, and that's the budget, right? We've talked about several times before, but of course, state lawmakers, it's the one thing they're constitutionally bound to do is pass a balanced budget, and that version is House Bill 1 this cycle. It is, of course, passed the House. It's passed the Senate. It is in conference committee to where, the 5 members from the House and 5 members of the Senate have to reconcile the differences. When it passed the Senate, it included $308 billion in total spending. That's state and federal spending together. That's a 16.3% increase roughly from the last biennium, represents about $43.2 billion more than what they spent the last biennium. We don't know exactly what that's going to look like. I don't believe we've seen the full conference committee report as of yet, but very likely that's going to come out this week. What are our kind of 30,000 foot level idea or view on the budget as we approach the end of the session, Tim?
Yeah, I think anticipate they're going to be right around that number, 308. It seems kind of late to be getting the conference committee report. Maybe I'm incorrect. Maybe it's been a couple of years, but I feel like we've gotten it sooner than the last week, the last few sessions, but I could be wrong there. I think the biggest overall picture is just how much we've grown spending. And yes, we have a big revenue year. Yes, we have a $33 billion surplus that they've used roughly about half of right? They're doing their best to stay under that constitutional spending limit. It's pretty apparent. But when we talk about growing the budget, the significant thing about growing the budget is we've spent a lot more. It's looking like something like HB 5 has a very good shot at passing, which of course is the renewal of the largest corporate welfare program in Texas. We've, increased occupational licensing. We've passed a ton of corporate welfare. We've expanded programs. Every single agency is getting huge inflation bumps, right? But when it comes to property tax relief, the question is, how much are they going to give us? Right now, I believe in the budget in its current, it was about 12 billion was set aside in that rider. So the House upped the ante and they raised the homestead exemption in SB 3 and added compression in, which I would assume is going to cause problems because that does not match up with the General Appropriations Act. And so that's really the big question in the back of my mind is, yes, we've grown government quite a bit. It's really a shame to see that. We should really be cutting. Of course, we were pushing a frozen budget, which would have saved us tens of billions of dollars and allowed more property tax relief. But nevertheless, with this much spending, the question is, are taxpayers going to be, repaid and refunded the money that the government ever collected?
I think anyone would be hard pressed, certainly, to not agree that this has been a big government session, right? Just collectively, if you look over the course of the 140-day session, you are correct. The amount of corporate welfare, the amount of spending on just all sorts of government licensure schemes and new programs and grant programs, all sorts of stuff that has happened this legislative session. It might come as no surprise to folks too, but because of course we were sounding the alarms right early before the legislative session when it became known that we would have this huge budget surplus, right? This over collection of taxpayer dollars. Taxpayers should be worried, right? Because if they're not going to return it to taxpayers, they're going to spend at least, if not all of it, a portion of it, as we've seen so far. We of course don't know what the final version of the budget looks like, but we expect that imminently. Obviously, they would have to do that before some of these deadlines that we talked about earlier. You briefly mentioned, let's briefly talk about it, right? Senate Bill 3 seems to be the kind of now, we thought it was dead. Now it's back as of last week. I guess the legislature's approach to property tax relief. Let's just remind folks, of course, this passed the House on Friday. Last Friday, the 19th. The question really is, will the Senate accept the changes that the House made to its version, Senate Bill 3. So when Senate Bill 3 left the Senate, it of course was solely focused on a homestead exemption increase, something prioritized by Lieutenant Governor 𝗓𝗏𝗏😅. It sat obviously in the House for over a month. The House has now changed it to where it's kind of this fusion of all of the approaches, all of the above, if you will, to where we now have not only the homestead exemption increase or proposed homestead exemption increase, you also have the appraisal caps or lowering of the appraisal caps from 10% to 5%, applying it to all real property. That was prioritized by the House leadership itself. You've got compression of the school maintenance and operations portion of the property tax, something of course we favor. And then you've got the House decided to increase the homestead exemptions even more to $100,000 for everyone, $110,000 for elderly and disabled. That heads back to the Senate. We are, of course, approaching some of these deadlines. Tim, what are your thoughts here? Do you think that the Senate will just accept it? Do you think they'll change it again? It'll go to a very quick conference committee. What are your thoughts?
Well, so, at this point, we're going to speculate because that's all we can do. We don't have anything solid from the Senate. At the beginning of the weekend, the word on the street and the rumors surrounding the Capitol were, hey, they're going to accept everything and everything's hunky-dory. And it is a massive improvement. The bill has improved. Does it go as far as we would like it to go? Well, no. We want complete elimination. We want a path to elimination. We didn't get that. But what did it improve? What SB 3 was? Well, yeah, it has, and they've given quite honestly a lot more in property tax relief. Now, the one critique we would throw at it is, hey, it's still not actually the biggest in history because we're not adjusting for inflation like they've adjusted all the other things. But is it a massive improvement? Is it going to help taxpayers? Yeah, it is. And we will applaud them in that aspect. Now, the real question, what you asked is, is it going to stay in that same version? And what we've seen in prior sessions is usually when things go to conference committee, they get worse. right? This is exactly what happened last go around, I believe. When we had the property tax relief package, they introduced that COVID rebate, and they had some compression, and it kept changing forms, and it went to conference committee, and they came back with the homestead exemption increase, right? And so it got watered down, and so we kind of kept getting worse and worse and worse. And so what we hear is there might be problems with the amount of money that is being offered in SB3 now, and is there enough money in our budget in its current form? That seems to be kind of what they're milling around about right now. What they're actually going to do, your guess is as good as mine. I really have no clue. We won't know until the conference committee report actually comes down and they reconcile this thing. So is it possible that they keep it in the same form? Yeah, absolutely. But I also think there's a very real possibility, especially since we've kind of heard a change in the mood in the rumors that surround these people who are involved, that they don't have agreement yet, essentially. And so I think it's going to be a bad look if the Senate lowers the homestead exemption and lowers the compression amount. That's not really going to look very good on them. And so my guess is they're probably going to try their best to keep it in the same form. But will it work out? We'll see. I just don't know. We'll find out in the next couple of days.
Well, of course, you briefly mentioned it. We're talking about property tax relief, and this has taken the form for businesses, for multinational corporations, of a corporate welfare revival effort in House Bill 5. Of course, we have talked about this several times. It is passed the House. It has made its way to the Senate. As of yesterday, it was passed out of the Senate Business and Commerce Committee by a vote of 6 in favor, 2 in opposition, and 3 people voting just present, right? White lighting it, not voting in favor or in opposition. It has changed forms. There are differences between what the Senate sponsor put in it, that's State Senator Charles Schwartner, and how it left the House. And so regardless, assuming that the House or the Senate does bring it up for a vote, and then of course, keeping in the back of our mind deadlines that we talked about at the beginning or the top of this Twitter space, you've got they've got a lot of things that would have to happen, meaning let's say it did get put on the Senate favorably voted it out of its body. It would have to go back to the House, and the House would have to vote yet again to either agree with the Senate changes or go to a very quick conference committee before deadlines. And so, as we talked about, right, it's just another one of these big ticket items that they've waited to the last minute here, just, really a matter of 2 or 3 days before these deadlines that we haven't seen the final version of. And so, as a reminder, that's House Bill 5, the corporate welfare revival effort, multi-billion-dollar collection of just tax abatements that would take place all across the state via the school district. That is potentially going to be put on a Senate intent calendar. Likely, we'll see that, I'm sure, tomorrow. It wasn't on, I don't believe, this morning's Senate intent calendar. So that is still alive and kicking. So do you have any thoughts on that before we pivot, Tim?
Yeah, this is one where, I actually, in the time we're run out on this one, it's, we've opposed this bill. It's a bad bill, and you could tell if you listen in on the committee and kind of commentary on the bill, there was questions asked like, why would we be giving and defaulting or giving 100 or 90% property tax abatements? There's discussion about possibly on the Senate floor moving it down to a 50% property tax abatement, right? Of course, we don't even support that. We want 0, right? Like, corporations are moving here. Statistically, this has nothing to do with why corporations are moving here. Very, very few of these even consider a tax abatements when it comes to moving their location to Texas. And so ultimately, all that's happening here is they're taking tax dollars that are taken from hardworking Texans and they're giving them to multinational corporations. Not all of them are multinational, but many, many of them are. Facebook, Samsung, I mean, huge corporations that do not need these tax abatements, where Texas taxpayers in their homes are being pushed out of their homes. So it's just really, really bad policy. And the fact that both of the parties oppose this in their platform, it's mind-blowing that they're just trying to ram this thing through. And so this is one where if the timer runs out on it, I'm not going to be upset at all. And I still highly encourage the Senate to vote this thing down. It is a bad piece of legislation. We do not need this in Texas. This has nothing to do with the Texas miracle. And so I would love to see this thing die. And I will be praying that way for sure.
The last thing we'll talk about today. So if you were, if you were like us and you were watching the Senate late last night, late on a Sunday night when they decided to meet, there were a lot of things that were happening as we approach some of these deadlines. But one of the more interesting things to happen seems to be this Hail Mary effort on school choice. And so let's briefly talk about that. For those that are familiar, the kind of big education savings account or school choice bill that was a priority of Governor Greg Abbott's. It was Senate Bill 8. Of course, that passed out of the Senate well over a month ago. It was left pending in the House Public Education Committee last week on the 15th after it was watered down significantly, having already been watered down, in my opinion, but watered down even more. The governor basically threatened a special legislative session and to veto this bill if it, for whatever reason, were to make it out of the House. Of course, that ended the prospects for the bill. The committee chairman decided not to even vote it out. And so what we saw last night seems to be a Hail Mary effort in that the Senate sponsor of the Education Savings Account bill, who's also the chairman of the Senate Education Committee, Brandon Creighton, announced a very kind of like, pop-up meeting this morning happening right now on House Bill 100. And so not to get too in the weeds, but House Bill 100, which has already passed the House, it's authored by State Representative Ken King out of Canadian there in the Panhandle, Republican lawmaker, is kind of this big school funding bill, right? It already passed the House. And so what the Senate author for the school choice legislation is doing is changing this bill, House Bill 100, to incorporate an ESA aspect to it. It's the school choice Hail Mary, as we called it. Ultimately, what it does is he's decreasing the basic allotment increase as it left the House, which was about $90 per pupil. He's decreasing it down to about $50, and then he's providing for education savings account amounting to about $8,000 per student each year to be open to almost all students. Now, the obvious question here, right, is let's say theoretically this gets voted out, and I believe Senator Creighton said he does intend to vote it out here in about an hour from his committee. Let's say it gets voted out of the Senate again. I think anyone who's an avid kind of watcher of the Texas legislature would be like, how the heck are you going to get Ken King, who's notoriously an anti-school choice lawmaker, to somehow accept the changes from the Senate, where it now includes not only school funding as he wants it, but also education savings accounts? What are your thoughts, Tim?
Yeah, I think this is kind of really tells the tale that it does not look like we're going to get school choice this go round. And so ultimately it's going to come up with come down to Abbott, right? And how much he pushes and is a special session called over this, right? Like I agree with you. Like Ken King is not going to agree to this. Let's get real. Could this be a big show and they go to conference and repair back? Yeah, sure. But I think the bigger story here is it does not appear that the House specifically is in favor of school choice. And so ultimately it looks like, they're kind of calling Abbott's bluff. And we're going to see if he is really serious about, parental choice. And honestly, it's probably the best case scenario for those who support school choice. The best case scenario is to go to a special session, because with everything that's going on right now, everything's very rushed. You're not going to get as much attention on this one important piece of legislation if we called a special session and this was placed, on the agenda, right? And so I think it looks, statistically and probably that school choice is not going to pass. I don't believe 100 the changes to it are going to be accepted by Ken King. And so I think what we're going to see is a likely special session over school choice. When is that going to happen? I don't know. I think Abbott's been so vocal about this and made so many tweets about it that he supports this and he wants it to get it done. I just don't see any scenario where he doesn't call a special session over this because he's been so vocal about it. If he doesn't, well, I kind of think it makes him look weak, right? He kind of just accepts. He went on this big tour for school choice, and it's up to him now. I mean, he's the only one who has the power to call a special session, and he can continue to call those until he gets this passed. And so I think that's the most likely scenario here. But you know what? I don't have a crystal ball. I'm just speculating. We shall see in the next few days.
All right. Well, that about wraps up today. Again, we wanted to convey that there are still some big ticket items here to be considered by both chambers in the legislature as we enter the final full week of the 88th legislative session. Of course, we are coming up on some deadlines. Tuesday, tomorrow being the first of many over the next few days before the ultimate end or sine die end of the 88th legislative session, which is Memorial Day, Monday, May 29th. And so we will have one additional episode next Monday on sine die of the week ahead, where I assume we'll sort of summarize the legislative session and what's going to happen, maybe going into a special legislative session shortly thereafter. And of course, we would implore you to also listen to our weekly audio video podcast, Taxpayer Talks, which gets published every Thursday, where we kind of summarize what has happened that week and some of the major narratives and themes happening in the Texas political scene. So we will be back next Monday for another episode of the week ahead. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We'll see you then.
Hey, you made it to the end of this video. Thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. Make sure you subscribe and hit the bell icon so that way you're notified next time we post a video and update to the channel. Thanks again.